I've never been much of a believer in those road stories, the ones truck drivers tell at gas stations to pass the time. I always thought it was an exaggeration or something in the head of someone who has spent too many sleepless nights. But what happened to me that morning was so absurd that to this day I feel kind of stupid telling it. But at the same time, if I don't speak up, it feels like the business is going to eat me up inside. I don't know if anyone will believe it, but I know what I saw, and there is no explanation to this day. It was around 2:30 in the morning, it was raining lightly, the kind of drizzle that feels like it's coming through your bones. I was heading towards Lages, with my load almost gone, listening to the radio on low just to avoid falling asleep. The road was empty, everything was dark, without any city lights nearby. I usually have peace of mind driving in the early hours of the morning, but that night I already had a strange feeling since I entered the mountains. It wasn't fear, it was an agony in my chest, as if something was wrong and I didn't know what. Out of nowhere, in the middle of that fog, a truck appeared behind me, with high beams, coming very fast. I was even irritated, I thought it was someone in a hurry trying to overtake in the rain. I gave him a signal to hold on, because the track was wet and there were a lot of curves, but the guy completely ignored it. The truck overtook me hard, at a completely reckless speed for that stretch. The strangest thing was that, when he passed by me, I looked straight into the cabin to see who the crazy person was, and there was no one there. The cabin was completely empty. At that moment my heart skipped a beat. I tried to convince myself that it was the reflection of the rain on the glass, which I didn't see clearly, but my blood ran cold. There was no way I could have seen it wrong. The light from my headlight hit the cabin as he passed, and it was empty. No silhouette, no movement, nothing. It was as if the truck was being driven by a ghost. Out of instinct, I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and remained paralyzed for a few seconds, trying to understand what had happened. The road ahead was just curves and cliffs, and that truck continued accelerating as if there was nothing there. I was a bit in shock, but curiosity hit me hard. I don't know what came into my head, but I decided to follow the truck. Maybe I was just trying to understand what I had seen, or maybe, I don't know, trying to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. I accelerated, and he was there in front, still accelerating as if nothing had happened. I followed him for a few minutes, not long, because the road was already starting to narrow and I knew that those mountains were treacherous. But the truck seemed to challenge me, going faster at every turn. It was when I entered a more isolated part of the road, where the trees formed an almost complete tunnel, that he made a turn so sharp that I could barely follow. I went slower, because the weather was getting worse and worse, and soon the road turned into a very steep climb. I could still see the headlights of the truck ahead, but the noise of the engine was already becoming strange, almost muffled. I continued climbing, and the truck seemed like it was going to leave me behind, but it disappeared at each turn, as if swallowed by the fog. I found myself with a strange feeling that I was going to the wrong place, but I couldn't stop. Something compelled me to continue. And that's when the truck made one last turn, a turn into a gorge, a place where the road almost collapsed into a cliff. I no longer saw the headlights, I no longer heard the sound of the engine. At the time, my stomach tightened and I slowed down completely. All I was left with was the sound of rain hitting the windshield and that strange silence, as if the whole world had gone quiet. I stopped right there, in the middle of the road, and looked ahead, trying to understand what was happening. There was no longer any sign of the truck, as if it had disappeared. I got out of the truck and looked around. The road was deserted, motionless, and the air seemed thicker, as if I had stepped somewhere I shouldn't have been. I walked a few steps to the edge of the gorge, but I couldn't see anything down there. The rain was still falling, but the sound seemed much louder, almost deafening. I didn't know if that truck had taken me there on purpose or if everything had been a sequence of bizarre coincidences. I just know that, no matter how much I tried to look from all angles, there was not the slightest sign that the truck had passed through that place. There were no marks on the road, nothing. He had simply disappeared. I stood there for a while, not knowing what to do. The fear didn't come from an immediate fright, but from a feeling of disorientation, as if the place I was in wasn't real. I was sure that truck was gone, but how? There was only one road there was no other way out. And the strangest thing is, when I got back to my truck and started back up, it felt like time had frozen. It didn't feel like I had stayed there for long, but the road was different now, the atmosphere was more closed, and I felt disconnected. Like everything had changed in a second, and I was stuck in some kind of limbo. When I passed the same curve where the truck disappeared, I still tried to look around the corners, see if I could find any clues, any signs of braking, any marks that would indicate that the truck had really followed that path. Nothing. There was nothing. Not a broken leaf, not a piece of metal. The gorge was still there, intact. I even stopped for a moment, thinking about calling the police or someone, but I knew nothing would happen. Nobody would believe it. And, as absurd as it was, I didn't want to bring more attention to that place. Something told me that I should get out of there as quickly as possible. In the end, I completed the journey and arrived at my destination without any further incidents. But something was wrong with me. I couldn't stop thinking about that truck, that road. And as much as I tried to convince myself that it was just an optical illusion or a glitch in my head, I knew it wasn't. The scariest thing is that, since that day, I have never seen another truck on that road, nor have I heard a similar story from another driver. As if the place where I passed had been locked, isolated. As if everything had disappeared along with the truck. And the worst thing of all is that to this day, every now and then, when I'm driving at night, I get the same shiver. As if, somewhere on the road, that truck was still waiting for me, ready to take me back, to get lost again. But now I know, it's better not to look for an explanation. Sometimes, certain things you just don't have. And I learned the hard way that there are things on the road that we shouldn't follow. I've been a truck driver for over 10 years, and the road is practically my home. I've been in all kinds of strange situations, but nothing that compares to what happened that night. I was coming back from California, heading south, and the road was deserted. It was late at night, around 3 a.m. The light drizzle fell steadily, and the headlights barely cut through the fog. I was already tired, without much energy, but I still had a good stretch to go. It was then that I saw her. A woman on the side of the road, with long, tied-up hair, wearing a dark coat and a scarf on her head. She seemed lost, and as there were no other cars around, I decided to stop and offer her a ride. I'm not one to stop and help, but something about that scene bothered me, and I felt a strange need to do it. She got in, nodded her thanks and sat in the passenger seat. The smell of cheap but sweet perfume lingered in the air. She didn't say much, she just looked at me a few times with her eyes fixed on the road, and she seemed to be in some kind of trance. As the road got lonelier, I tried to start a conversation, but she only responded with short answers, almost as if she wasn't really there. In those early morning hours, the silence was heavier than anything else. I started to feel uncomfortable, and when I passed a darker patch, I looked at the passenger seat. She was no longer there. I thought it had been some kind of tired illusion, but the bench was empty, as if she had disappeared there, leaving no trace. I stopped the truck on the side of the road and stared at the bank, trying to understand what had happened. The smell of perfume was still in the air, but there was no sign of anyone. The road was completely empty. I went to the truck door and looked around, but I didn't see anything. I even tried to reverse for a short stretch, thinking that maybe it had gone down and I hadn't noticed, but the only sound was the rain hitting the windows. Fear started to take over me, and I accelerated without thinking, trying to get out of there as quickly as possible. The strangest thing is that, no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I was tired or that my mind was playing tricks on me, that feeling that someone was still in the truck didn't go away. It was as if I felt the weight of a presence, but with no one there. I continued driving for a few more miles, trying to shake the feeling that this woman was still with me. The road seemed increasingly endless, and the feeling of anguish grew. The rain was heavier now, and the truck's headlights were starting to blend in with the fog, making everything even more claustrophobic. When I passed a small gas station, I decided to stop. I was already exhausted and needed a coffee to try and clear my head. The station's yellow light blinked intermittently, almost as if it were ghostly lighting. I entered the place, threw the truck door back and went to the pump. Inside, the gas station attendant looked at me with the look of someone who was already used to the weird hours, and asked me if I wanted coffee. I said yes, and he started preparing, while I watched the road outside, the sound of rain filling the early morning silence. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to ask if he knew anything strange on that part of the road. He looked at me strangely, as if he were hearing this for the first time, and then, as if the answer had already been prepared, he said, "You know, many years ago a woman died on that road. She was run over and thrown off the road. They say that, every now and then, she still appears there, hitchhiking. Some say she is a spirit." At that moment, I was frozen. The gas station attendant, as if he was telling some kind of story, continued talking, but my hands started to sweat and the coffee became completely tasteless. He described the woman to me in such precise detail that it seemed impossible for him to have invented it. The woman had her hair tied up, the same scarf, and a dark coat, exactly like the one I had given a ride to. He told me that she was always seen near that deserted stretch, but that no one ever saw her disappear as quickly as I did. When he finished speaking, fear gripped me in a way I had never felt before. I left as quickly as I could, without even finishing my coffee. The road now seemed more dangerous than ever, and I was feeling tired, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't stop thinking about the gas station attendant's story and how everything had come together in such a frightening way. I wanted to believe that it was just a coincidence, that the guy was just spreading road stories, but the image of the woman in the passenger seat wouldn't leave my head. And the worst thing is, as I drove back, I started to smell that same sweet, cheap perfume filling the air inside the cabin. I kept driving, trying to ignore the smell, but it seemed to get stronger with every mile. I looked at the passenger seat, hoping to see something, but the seat was still empty. At first, I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me after the story the gas station attendant told me. But the fear was real, and the smell of the perfume became so intense that it seemed like the woman was next to me again. The worst thing is that, every time I looked at the road, I saw those reflections in the shadows, as if someone was moving on the sides of the road, following the truck. It was when I passed a more distant section, where the road narrowed between two large rocks, that I saw something in the rearview mirror. A silhouette. I looked quickly, but the vision was so quick that I couldn't make it out clearly. It looked like a woman, but that wasn't possible. Fear tightened my grip even more, and I accelerated the truck without even realizing it. I was almost panicking, my heart pounding so hard I almost couldn't breathe. When I finally looked back at the passenger seat, I saw a reflection in the window. It was not the seated woman, but a shadow, a vague silhouette, which disappeared as quickly as it appeared. I stopped the truck again, now in a panic, sweat dripping down my forehead. It was clear that something was very wrong, and I knew I was no longer alone. I looked everywhere, but there was no one. The nearest gas station was hours away, and the road seemed endless. I wanted to stop, get out of the truck and ask for help, but there was no one there. There was nothing left but the sound of rain and the headlights, which now seemed to be the only real thing on that damn road. From that moment on, I never went through that stretch again. To this day, I don't have the courage to tell this story to many people, because I know they will call me crazy. But what happened that night has no explanation. I don't know if it was a spirit or something else, but I know that that woman, or whatever it was there, with me, watching me. And to this day, when I pass by deserted roads, I smell that sweet perfume in the air, as if she was waiting for me. I will never forget the feeling of being followed by something I couldn't see. It was a silent, almost unsettling night when I was called to a late-night delivery in rural California. I've been a truck driver for over 15 years and I've been on many deserted roads, but there was something different that night. The sky was clear, but there was a thick fog that seemed to swallow everything around it. The road was narrow, unpaved, and the only lighting came from my truck's headlights. I was tired, but I had no choice but to continue. The city was far away and the road seemed endless. That's when I went around a bend and saw a light in the distance. At first, I thought it was some station or some house. But as I got closer, I realized that there were no houses nearby, just an open clearing on the side of the road. In the center of this clearing, there was a bonfire. The flame burned intensely, but it didn't make any sense to be there, in the middle of nowhere, at that hour. The strangest thing was seeing a group of people around this bonfire. They were dressed in white, as if they were in some kind of ceremony or ritual. The flames lit up their faces, but they didn't move, they just stood there, in a circle, staring into the fire. My body was paralyzed for a moment. I had never seen anything like it, and fear began to take over me. It was like everything in my head was telling me to keep going and not stop, but my feet were too heavy to move the truck. Something about those faces bothered me. They had no expressions, they were like masks. I tried to look to the side, looking for some logical explanation, but there was nothing but the bush and dark trees. The only thing I could hear was the wind rustling the leaves and the crackling of wood burning in the fire pit. As much as I tried to move forward, I wanted to go back and get out of there as quickly as possible. The feeling of being watched made my bones chill, and I sped up the truck, trying to ignore what I had just seen. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I couldn't believe what I saw. What seemed like a normal road behind me was now different. It was as if the road had deformed. I passed the same curve again. Same place, same campfire, same people. Only now, I was closer. The feeling of being trapped there, like in a nightmare, became even stronger. Fear began to spread through me like ice, and even with the truck's engine roaring and the acceleration at maximum, I couldn't get out of that damn loop. I looked at the rearview mirror once more, trying to process what was happening, but there was no doubt, I was back in the same spot, with the same bonfire glowing in front of me, the people in white still standing around, as still as statues. I slowed down, trying to rationalize the situation, but the strange feeling that something was controlling me left me unresponsive. I tried to turn in another direction, but the road seemed to pull me back, as if I were stuck in a cycle. I stopped, this time with my heart beating faster than ever. What the hell was going on there? I looked at the horizon, trying to find something familiar, something that would make me believe I was actually somewhere familiar. But nothing. Everything was the same. The same road, the same shadowy trees, and the bonfire shining like a beacon. I wanted to get out of there, to go back, but it seemed like any movement I tried to make took me directly to the same place. It was as if the road had closed around me, isolating me, and I had no way to escape. I tried to somehow speed up the truck to see what would happen. The road became darker and darker, and the sound of the engine became more muffled, as if the road had swallowed the machine. I looked ahead again and, in the background, I saw the figures around the fire moving slowly but without making any noise. I didn't know what they were doing, but it seemed like they were watching me, as if they were waiting for me to make a decision, an action. A growing tension began to form in the air, a feeling that something, or someone, was waiting for the right moment to do whatever it was. That's when one of the men, dressed in white, stepped forward. He seemed to slowly approach the truck, but there was no hurry in his movements. The tension was growing, and I realized that he was approaching my window, his eyes fixed on mine. I wanted to scream, I wanted to start and get out of there, but fear was paralyzing me. He reached the truck, put his hand on the window, and touched it with his fingertips, but the touch made no sound. I saw his hand, pale and cold, and it was as if time had stopped. My heart felt like it was going to come out of my mouth, and I could no longer think clearly. It was like I had entered an endless nightmare, and the only thing I knew was that I was no longer in control. That hand on the window was the breaking point. I stepped on the accelerator with all my might, without thinking about anything. I just wanted to get out of that place. But, like a repetitive nightmare, the road didn't change. It was the same curve, the same point, the same bonfire and the same people around it, now closer than before. I looked in the rearview mirror, and there they were again, the figures in white, still watching. Despair took over me. I didn't know what else to do. My every move felt futile, a desperate attempt to escape something I didn't understand. I was stuck there, and there was nothing else I could do. The fog around the road began to thicken, and the air became heavier, almost suffocating. I was in a cold sweat, my vision blurred from trying to process what was happening. Everything felt out of place, like the whole world had stopped, and the only thing I could do was spin in circles. I tried to look around, but the dense bush around me seemed to close in every moment, as if I were being swallowed by that road, that place. And, in the distance, the bonfire continued to burn, constant and endless. The people in white remained there, without moving, without expression, as if I were the only living being there. Suddenly, I felt a stronger shiver and the voice of something I didn't know if it was my mind or some kind of entity telling me to not look back. But I had already looked so many times that it seemed impossible not to. So when I finally gave in, I looked in the rearview mirror. For the first time, I saw one of the faces move. The eyes of one of the men at the fire glowed, and he seemed to be watching me directly. It was a feeling of oppression so intense that I almost couldn't breathe. The fear was so overwhelming that I stopped trying to escape. I already knew there was no way out. And then, as if pulled by an invisible force, my truck suddenly stopped. I looked out the window and saw that I was now completely surrounded by the figures in white. They were all around my truck, their shadows cast by the campfire flames. There was no more sound, just the noise of the wind and the crackle of burning wood. I was trapped, unable to get out, and absolute silence took over everything. The worst of all was realizing that, for the first time, the figures began to move. But it wasn't like before, they were coming towards me. And the moment the closest of them all put his hand on the window, everything went out. The last sound I heard was my own heavy breathing, and then, nothing. I was returning from a long delivery, that feeling of tiredness mixed with the loneliness of the road. It was past midnight, and the journey seemed endless. The truck's clock was almost 3 a.m. when I started to feel heavy in my eyes. I no longer knew how many hours I had been driving, and the weight of sleep was becoming unbearable. The road was empty, without a single headlight in sight, and no matter how much I tried to stay alert, the sleepiness only deepened. It was then that I saw the sign. A gas station. It didn't look very big, but it seemed like the only decent thing to stop at. The strange thing is that the post was not on any map, and the GPS I was using had no sign of it. But, as I was desperate, I didn't think much about it and decided to stop anyway. It was a simple roadside station, but it seemed to be working. The lights were on and the pump was there, ready to fill up. There was nothing more than that, a simple and solitary building, surrounded by a darkness that seemed to swallow everything around it. I went to the pump, swiped my card, and when the gas station attendant appeared, I noticed something strange. The gas station attendant was a tall man, with a simple uniform and no expression on his face. He didn't say a word during the fueling, he just looked at me blankly, as if I were a lifeless robot. I tried to start a conversation, but he just nodded, continuing his work as if in a trance. This bothered me, but I was so tired that I decided to ignore it and, after refueling, I walked away to park near a rest bench. The night was so quiet that the sound of the wind seemed to be lost in the immensity of the place. I sat on the bench and lit a cigarette, trying to relax for a few minutes before continuing my journey. But as time passed, I realized something wasn't right. The feeling of isolation was almost oppressive, and the silence was heavy, with no sound from the road. I went to look at the truck's clock and noticed something even stranger. The time had advanced by more than an hour, but I hadn't left. I was sure that time was passing much slower than it should. When I looked at the station, the gas station attendant was still there, standing, without moving a muscle, as if he were a statue, always looking in the same direction. The discomfort began to consume me. I was starting to feel trapped there, but I still tried to convince myself that it was just the fatigue. I went to the truck, determined to continue my journey, but something stopped me. The road was different. With every movement I made, the feeling that I was no longer in the same place intensified. I tried to start the engine, but the sound of the truck seemed muffled, as if the environment had changed. I looked at the gas station, and now I noticed that it looked bigger, further away, like it was distorted. It didn't make sense. The road seemed to be the same, but the post seemed to have moved away from me. The worst, however, happened when I looked at the map again. The post wasn't there. The GPS showed nothing, not even a road at that point. It sent a chill down my spine, and I began to feel a growing sense of panic. I didn't know what was happening anymore. How could that gas station disappear from the map like that? Was I falling victim to some illusion of tiredness or did it really not exist? The truth was, the more I tried to get out of there, the more the road seemed to swallow me. Every time I moved forward a little, I came back to exactly the same point, as if I was stuck in some kind of loop. That's when I realized that the station's lights were now brighter, almost blinding. The gas station attendants remained motionless, but there were more of them. Many more. All with the same empty expressions, without a single gesture of life. I was beginning to wonder if I was in a nightmare, or if I had crossed over into some dimension where time and space no longer made sense. I reversed, and the road seemed to go straight ahead, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, I realized that the gas station was still there, unchanged, even after I had passed it. I couldn't get out of there anymore, and the feeling of being trapped intensified with each failed attempt. Desperate, I decided to stop trying to leave. With each movement, it felt like the post was getting closer to me, like it was watching me. I returned to the rest bench and lay there, feeling my body give in to exhaustion. It was then that I heard something. A low sound, like a whisper. It was coming from somewhere far away, but it was getting stronger. I looked at the gas station attendants, who now began to move slowly, their eyes fixed on me. I felt them getting closer, as if they had finally noticed my presence. The feeling that I was no longer on a road, but somewhere outside of reality, crushed me. That feeling of being watched was taking on unbearable proportions. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt heavy, as if the environment itself was holding me there. The light from the gas station's lamps flickered irregularly, and the gas station attendants were now closer, their eyes fixed on me, without any sign of emotion. I was trapped in some kind of mental or physical prison, and time seemed to never pass. The sound of my own footsteps echoed hollowly in the air, and with every movement I made, the road seemed more closed, as if the walls of the station were closing in on me. I tried to run, but the post felt like a prison, and the road no longer made sense. When I looked at the horizon, all I saw was impenetrable darkness, and the post was there, untouched, as if it had never moved. I was becoming more and more desperate. I didn't know what else to do or where to go. Every time I tried to leave, I always returned to the same spot, the same station, the same lifeless gas station attendants. It was as if I was being manipulated by some unknown force, which was making me return to that place, where time and space had lost their meaning. It was then that, in a last act of desperation, I decided to ignore the gas station attendants and got into the truck, trying to start the engine and get out anyway. But as soon as I started, the sound of the engine died down, until it disappeared completely. I looked outside, and now the shadows were thicker, as if the air itself had become heavy. I no longer knew if I was dreaming or if I was living a waking nightmare, but the feeling that the station was swallowing me was so strong that my body shook. I finally managed to look at the truck's clock, and the next thing I knew, it was stopped. It no longer marked hours, just a straight line, without any change. Time didn't exist there. I looked at the gas station attendants one last time, and noticed that they were now moving, slowly, walking towards the truck. I didn't know what else to do, but the strangest thing of all was that, when I looked at the station for the last time, it simply disappeared, as if it had never been there. And the most terrifying thing was realizing that, while I was still trying to understand what had happened, the truck's clock started to advance, and I was back on the road, with the feeling that nothing had really changed, as if everything was ready to start again. I was trapped, not knowing where or when I was. I'm not one to imagine things, but over the last few weeks something has started to bother me deeply. I'm a truck driver. I've traveled through several states here in the USA, and at night, when the road is quiet, I always pay more attention. But what happened to me recently, that wasn't normal. I was driving along US Route 2, in the stretch between Kalispell and Libby, Montana. It is an isolated road, with long stretches without cell phone signal, cutting through dense forests. And it was there that I started to see the same figure standing on the side of the road. Always at the same point. A man, alone, standing, staring at me every time I passed by. The first time, I thought it was just someone waiting for help, or maybe just a hiker. He was about 30 meters from the shoulder, almost hidden by the shade of the trees. When I passed him, I felt a strange chill, a discomfort that I couldn't explain. The figure was motionless, and even in the dim light, I could clearly see that he was staring at me. I looked in the rearview mirror shortly after, and he was still there, standing still, exactly the same way. I tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, or that maybe my head was playing tricks because of tiredness, but it didn't take long to realize that something was wrong. The following nights were the same. Every time I passed that same stretch of US 2, he was there. Same spot, same posture, as if it had been glued to the scene. It didn't matter if I passed by sooner or later, he was always there. His presence began to disturb me, and worst of all was the strange feeling that came with it, as if he were waiting for me. It was impossible to ignore. I started losing sleep, driving faster just to get past that point, but this only increased my anguish. Until one night, I made the decision to stop. To get out of the truck and face whatever that was head on. It was almost midnight, and my nerves were already on edge. The road was completely empty, only the sound of tires on the asphalt and my own racing heart kept me company. As I approached the stretch, there he was. Still, as always. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road, turned off the headlights and got out. The road was engulfed in deep pitch black, and only the moonlight dimly illuminated the environment. Every step I took towards the figure seemed to tug at a thread of tension within me. The air there was different, thicker, almost as if that stretch of road existed outside the rest of the world. As I got closer, the silence became more oppressive, as if the road itself had stopped breathing. I didn't know what to expect, but something inside me told me that this man wasn't simply a lost wanderer. Fear grew in me, but I continued walking, unable to stop. When I got about 10 meters away, I could see more details. He was dressed simply, a dark coat and jeans, but the strangest thing was the expression on his face. There was no fear, no pain, no emotion of any kind. He looked empty, like he was just a shadow of a human being. His eyes were fixed on mine, and I couldn't look away. I stopped. I didn't know what to do. The man didn't move, but there was something about his presence that made me feel like I was completely surrounded, like he was a part of that stretch of road. The feeling that he wasn't there by accident intensified. With every second that passed, the harder it was for me to move. I wanted to speak, I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come out. I felt the cold air around me, and a light breeze cut through my skin, but the man seemed oblivious to it all. He was just there, watching me with an intensity one had never felt before. It was when I took the first step toward him, determined to finally confront him, that something happened. The man disappeared. It wasn't like a quick movement, but as if his own image had dissolved, disappeared into the darkness, without leaving any trace. I stopped, paralyzed. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The figure that was there, staring at me, simply evaporated before my eyes. I looked around, looking for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. The emptiness of the road seemed even deeper now, more threatening. When I looked at the ground, something still made me freeze inside: footprints. They were there, starting right where the man was standing, but, to my complete and utter surprise, the mark simply disappeared into nowhere, as if he had been swallowed by the earth itself. There was nothing left but those footprints that ended abruptly, without explanation. I ran back to the truck, and that's when I realized that, at that moment, time seemed to have stopped. My body was shaking, my mind was trying to process what I had just seen, but I knew something very strange was happening there. Something I could no longer ignore. I couldn't look back anymore. I got in the truck and started it as fast as I could, trying to get out of that damn place. The road in front of me seemed endless, but as I sped up, something strange started to happen. The feeling that I was being followed swallowed me completely. At every turn, every mile, it felt like I was being pulled back to that point. It was no longer just the road it used to be. I didn't know how to explain it, but the feeling that I was trapped there, on the same road, in the same spot where the man disappeared, became unbearably strong. I looked in the rearview mirror and, for a moment, I swore I saw the figure again. She was standing on the side of the road, where I had first seen her, watching me, as if no time had passed. My heart stopped for a second. I accelerated even more, trying to get out of that nightmare, but the road, no matter how hard I tried, seemed to swallow me. It was as if that man was everywhere, as if he were part of the asphalt itself, the earth itself. I looked around, trying to find something familiar, but everything seemed different, darker, denser, as if the entire world had distorted around me. It was then that I started to hear a low, dragging sound coming from the back of the truck. Something that shouldn't be there. I stopped again, fear freezing my insides, and climbed out of the truck, feeling the pressure of an invisible weight on me. The sound continued, but it was impossible to identify where it was coming from. I looked around, and it was then that I realized that the footprints, those same footprints that had disappeared, were there again. They were following me, forming in the dust of the road, and stretched out in front of me, as if the man was guiding me somewhere. But it was no longer a road. When I looked into the distance, the horizon was distorted, as if the path in front of me was an illusion. I was in a place where time no longer made sense, and what terrified me most was realizing that there was no longer any escape. I was stuck there, in a repeating cycle. The man, the road, the footprints. It was no longer a simple trip, it was as if I had been marked, as if, for some reason I didn't understand, I was doomed to live that nightmare for an indefinite period of time. And the scariest thing of all was that, as I looked in the rearview mirror for the last time, I saw, once again, the man on the side of the road, waiting for me.